From that time Gerard was entirely altered. His boyish spirit was dashed. He brooded perpetually over the wrong done his mother, and was irritated to madness by feeling that by a look and a word he could not make others share his belief in her spotless innocence. He became sullen, shy, shut up in himself. Above all, he shunned his father. Months passed away. Requisitions, set on foot at first from a desire to succor, were continued from a resolve to revenge. No pains or expense were spared to discover the fugitives, and all in vain. The opinion took root that they had fled to America, and who on that vast continent could find two beings resolved on concealment? Inquiries were made at New York and other principal towns, but all in vain. The strangest and most baffling circumstance in this mystery was that no guess could be formed as to who the stranger was. Though he seemed to have dropped from the clouds, he had evidently been known long before to Mrs. Neville. His name, it appeared, was Rupert. No one knew of any bearing that name. Had Eliza loved before her marriage? Such a circumstance must have been carefully hidden, for her husband had never suspected it. Her childhood had been spent with her mother, her father being mostly at sea. When 16, she lost her mother, and after a short interval resided with her father, then retired from service. He had assured Sir Boyvill that his daughter had never loved, and the husband, jealous as he was, had never seen cause to doubt the truth of this statement. Had she formed any attachment during the first years of her married life? Was it to escape the temptation so held out that she secluded herself in the country? Rupert was probably a feigned name, and Sir Boyvill tried to recollect who her favourites were, so to find a clue by their actions to her disappearance. It was in vain that he called to mind every minute circumstance and pondered over the name of each visitor. He could remember nothing that helped discovery. Yet the idea that she had, several years ago, conceived a partiality for some man who, as it proved, loved her to distraction, became fixed in Sir Boyvill's mind. The thought poured venom on the time gone by. It might have been a virtue in her to banish him she loved and to seclude herself. But this mystery, where all seemed so frank and open, this defalcation of the heart, this inward thought which made no sign, yet ruled every action, was gall and wormwood to her proud, susceptible husband. That in her secret soul she loved this other was manifest, for though it might be admitted that he used art and violence to tear her from her home, yet in the end she was vanquished, and even maternal duties and affections sacrificed to irresistible passion. Can you wonder that such a man as Sir Boyvill, ever engrossed by the mighty idea of self, yet fearful that that self should receive the minutest wound, proud of his wife, because, being so lovely and so admired, she was all his, grateful to her, for being so glorious and enviable a possession, can you wonder that this vain but sensitive man should be wound up to the height of jealous rage by the loss of such a good, accompanied by circumstances of deception and dishonor? He had been fond of his wife in return for her affection, while she in reality loved another. He had respected the perfection of her truth, and there was falsehood at the core. Had she avowed the traitor passion, declared her struggles, and laying bare her heart, confessed that, while she preferred his honor and happiness, yet in the weakness of her nature another had stolen a portion of that sentiment which she desired to consecrate to him, then with what tenderness he had forgiven her, with what soothing forbearance. He had borne her fault, how magnanimous and merciful he had shown himself, but she had acted the generous part. Thanks had come from him, the shows of obligation from her. He fancied that he held a flower in his hand, from which the sweetest perfume alone could be extracted, but the germ was blighted, and the very core turned to bitter ashes and dust. Such a theme is painful. Howsoever we view it, it is scarcely possible to imagine any event in life more desolating. To be happy is to attain one's wishes and to look forward to the lastingness of their possession. Sir Boyvill had long been skeptical and distrusting, but at last he was brought to believe that he had drawn the fortunate ticket, that his wife's faith was a pure and perfect chrysolite, and if in his heart he deemed that she did not regard him with all the reverence that was his due, if she did not nurture all the pride of place and disdain of her fellow creatures which he thought that his wife ought to feel, yet her many charms and virtues left him no room for complaint. Her sensibility, her vivacity, her wit, her accomplishments, her exceeding loveliness, they were all undeniably his, and all made her a piece of enchantment. This merit was laid low, deprived of its crown, her fidelity to him, and the selfish, the heartless, and the cold whom she reproved and disliked were lifted to the eminence of virtue, while she lay fallen, degraded, worthless. Sir Boyvill was, in his own conceit, forever placed on a pedestal, and he loved to imagine that he could say, "Look at me, you can see no defect. I am a wealthy and a well-born man. I have a wife the envy of all, children who promise to inherit all our virtues. I am prosperous, no harm can reach me, look at me." He was still on his pedestal, but had become a mark for scorn, for pity. Oh, how he loathed himself, how he abhorred her who had brought him to this pass. He had, in her best days, often fancied that he loved her too well, yielded too often his pride, nurtured schemes to her soft persuasions. He had indeed believed that Providence had created this exquisite and most beautiful being, that life might be made perfect to him. Besides, his months and days and hours had been replete with her image, her very admirable qualities, accompanied as they were by the trembling delicacy that droops at a touch, and then revives at a word, her quickness, not of temper but of feeling, which received such sudden and powerful impression, formed her to be at once admired and cherished with the care a sweet exotic needs, when transplanted from its sunny, native clime to the ungenial temperature of a northern land. It was madness to recollect all the fears he had wasted on her. He had foregone the dignity of manhood to wait on her. He had often feared to pursue his projects, lest they should jar some delicate chord in her frame. To his own recollection, it seemed that he had become but the lackey to her behests, and all for the sake of a love which she bestowed on another, to preserve that honor which she blasted without pity. It were in vain to attempt to delineate the full force of jealousy. Natural sorrow at losing a thing so sweet and dear was blended with anger that he should be thrown off by her. The misery of knowing that he should never see her more was mingled with a ferocious desire to learn that every disaster was heaped on one whom hitherto he had, as well as he could, guarded from every ill. To this we may add commiseration for his deserted children. His son, late so animated, so free, spirited, and joyous, a more promising child had never blessed a father's hopes, was changed into a brooding, grief-struck, blighted visionary. His little girl, the fairy thing he loved best of all, she was taken from him. The carelessness of a nurse during a childish illness caused her death, within a year after her mother's flight. Had that mother remained, such carelessness had been impossible. Sir Boyvill felt that all good fell from him, the only remaining golden fruit dropped from the tree, calamity encompassed him. With his whole soul he abhorred and desired to wreak vengeance on her who caused the ill. After 2 years were past, and no tidings were received of the fugitives, it seemed plain that there could be but one solution to the mystery. No doubt she and her lover concealed themselves in some far land, under a feigned name. If indeed it were, if it be so, it might move any heart to imagine poor Alytha's misery, the obloquy that mantles over her remembrance at home, while she broods over the desolation of the hearth she so long adorned, and the pining, impatient anguish of her beloved boy. What could or can keep her away is matter of fearful conjecture, but this much is certain, that at that time at least, and now, if she survives, she must be miserable. Sir Boyvill, if he deigned to recollect these things, enjoyed the idea of her anguish, but without adverting to her state and feelings, he was desirous of obtaining what reparation he could, and to dispossess her of his name. Endeavors to find the fugitives in America and false hopes held out had delayed the process. He at last entered on it with eagerness. 1,000 obvious reasons rendered a divorce desirable, and to him, with all his pride, then only would his pillow be without a thorn, when she lost his name and every right or tie that bound them together. Under the singular circumstances of the case, he could only obtain a divorce by a bill in Parliament, and to this measure he resorted. There was nothing reprehensible in this step. Self-defense, as well as revenge, suggested its expediency. Besides this, it may be said that he was glad of the publicity that would ensue, that he might be proved blameless to all the world. He accused his wife of a fault so great as tarnished irrecoverably her golden name. He accused her of being a false wife and an unnatural mother, under circumstances of no common delinquency. But he might be mistaken. He might view his injuries with the eye of passion, and others, more disinterested, might pronounce that she was unfortunate, but not guilty. By means of the bill for divorce, the truth would be investigated and judged by several hundred of the best-born and best-educated of his countrymen. The publicity, also, might induce discovery. It was fair and just, and though his pride rebelled against becoming the tale of the day, he saw no alternative. Indeed, it was reported to him by some officious friend that many had observed that it was strange that he had not sought this remedy before. Something of wonder, or blame, or both, was attached to his passiveness. Such hints galled him to the quick, and he pursued his purpose with all the obstinacy and imperious haste peculiar to him. When every other preliminary had been gone through, it was deemed necessary that Gerard should give his evidence at the bar of the House of Lords. Sir Boyvill looked upon his lost wife as a criminal, so steeped in deserved infamy, so odious, and so justly condemned, that none could hesitate in siding with him to free him from the bondage of those laws, which, while she bore his name, might be productive of incalculable injury. His honor, too, was wounded. His honor, which he would have sacrificed his life to have preserved untainted, he had entrusted to Alytha, and loved her the more fervently that she regarded the trust with reverence. She had foully betrayed it, and must not all who respected the world's customs and the laws of social life, above all, must not any who loved him be forward to cast her out from any inheritance of good that could reach her through him. Above all, must not their son, his son, share his indignation and assist his revenge. Gerard was but a boy, but his mother's tenderness, his own quick nature, and lastly, the sufferings he had endured through her flight, had early developed a knowledge of the realities of life, and so keen a sense of right and justice as made his father regard him as capable of forming opinions and acting from such motives as usually are little understood by one so young. And true it was that Gerard fostered sentiments independent of any teaching, and cherished ideas the more obstinately because they were confined to his single breast. He understood the pity with which his father was regarded, the stigma cast upon his mother, the suppressed voice, the wink of the eye, the covert hint. He understood it all, and like the poet, longed for a word, sharp as a sword, to pierce the falsehood through and through. For many months, he and his father had seen little of each other. Sir Boyvill had not a mind that takes pleasure in watching the ingenuous sallies of childhood or the development of the youthful mind. The idea of making a friend of his child, which had been Alytha's fond and earnest aim, could never occur to his self-engrossed heart. Since his illness, Gerard had been weakly, or he would have been sent to school. As it was, a tutor resided in the house. This person was written to by Sir Boyvill's man of business, and directed to break the matter to his pupil, to explain the formalities, to soothe and encourage any timidity he might show, and to incite him, if need were, to a desire to assist in a measure, whose operation was to render justice to his father. The first allusion to his mother, made by Mr. Carter, caused the blood to rush from the boy's heart, and to dye crimson his cheeks, his temples, his throat. Then he grew deadly pale, and without uttering a word, listened to his preceptor, till suddenly taking in the nature of the task assigned to him, every limb shook, and he answered by a simple request to be left alone, and he would consider. No more was thought by the unapprehensive people about, than that he was shy of being spoken to on the subject, that he would make up his mind in his own way, and Mr. Carter at once yielded to his request. The reserve which had shrouded him since he lost his mother had accustomed those about him to habitual silence. No one watchful, attached, intelligent eye marked the struggles which shook his delicate frame, blanched his cheek, took the flesh from his bones, and quickened his pulse into fever. None marked him as he lay in bed the livelong night, with open eyes and beating heart a prey to contending emotion. He was passed carelessly by as he lay on the dewy grass from morn to evening, his soul torn by grief, uttering his mother's name in accents of despair, and shedding floods of tears. I said that these signs of intense feeling were not remarked, and yet they were, in a vulgar way, by the menials, who said it would be well when the affair was over. Master Neville took it so to heart, and was sadly frightened. Frightened, such a coarse, undistinguishing name was given to the sacred terror of doing his still loved mother an injury, which heaved his breast with convulsive sobs and filled his veins with fire. The thought of what he was called upon to do haunted him day and night with agony. He, her nursling, her idol, her child, he who could not think of her name without tears, and dreamed often that she kissed him in his sleep, and woke to weep over the delusion. He was to accuse her before an assembled multitude, to give support to the most infamous falsehoods, to lend his voice to stigmatize her name, and wherever she was, kept from him by some irresistible power, but innocent as an angel and still. Loving him, she was to hear of him as her enemy and receive a last wound from his hand. Such appeared the task assigned to him in his eyes, for his blunt, witted tutor had spoken of the justice to be rendered his father, by freeing him from his fugitive wife, without regarding the inner heart of his pupil, or being aware that his mother sat throned there, an angel of light and goodness, the victim of ill, but doing none. Soon after Mrs. Neville's flight, the family had abandoned the seat in Cumberland and inhabited a house taken near the Thames in Buckinghamshire. Here Gerard resided, while his father was in town watching the progress of the bill. At last, the day drew near when Gerard's presence was required. The peers showed a disposition, either from curiosity or a love of justice, to sift the affair to the uttermost, and the boy's testimony was declared absolutely necessary. Mr. Carter told Gerard that on the following morning they were to proceed to London, in pursuance of the circumstances which he had explained to him a few days before. "Is it then true," said the boy, "that I am to be called upon to give evidence, as you call it, against my mother?" "You are called upon by every feeling of duty," replied the sapient preceptor, "to speak the truth to those whose decision will render justice to your father. If the truth injure Mrs. Neville, that is her affair." Again Gerard's cheeks burned with blushes, and his eyes, dimmed as they were with tears, flashed fire. "In that case," he said, "I beg to see my father." "You will see him when in town," replied Mr. Carter. "Come, Neville, you must not take the matter in this girlish style. Show yourself a man. Your mother is unworthy." "If you please, sir," said Gerard, half-choked, yet restraining himself, "I will speak to my father. I do not like anyone else to talk to me about these things." "As you please, sir," said Mr. Carter, much offended. No more was said. It was evening. The next morning they set out for London. The poor boy had lain awake the whole night, but no one knew or cared for his painful vigils. Chapter 19. On the following day the journey was performed, and it had been arranged that Gerard should rest on the subsequent one, the third being fixed for his attendance in the House of Lords. Sir Boyvill had been informed how sullenly, that was the word they used, the boy had received the information conveyed him by his tutor. He would rather have been excused saying a word himself to his son on the subject, but this account, and the boy's request to see him, forced him to change his purpose. He did not expect opposition, but he wished to give a right turn to Gerard's expressions. The sort of cold distance that separation and variance of feeling produced rendered their intercourse little like the tender interchange of parental and filial love. "Gerard, my boy," Sir Boyvill began, "we are both sufferers, and you, like me, are not of a race tamely to endure injury. I would willingly have risked my life to revenge the ruin brought on us, so I believe would you, child as you are, but the skulking villain is safe from my arm. The laws of his country cannot even pursue him, yet what reparation is left, I must endeavor to get." Sir Boyvill showed tact in thus bringing forward only that party whose act none could do other than reprobate, and who was the object of Gerard's liveliest hatred. His face lightened up with something of pleasure, his eye flashed fire. To prove to the world the guilt and violence of the wretch who had torn his mother from him was indeed a task of duty and justice. Little more forbearance on his father's part had wound him easily to his will, but the policy Sir Boyvill displayed was involuntary, and his next words overturned all. "Your miserable mother," he continued, "must bear her share of infamy, and if she be not wholly hardened, it will prove a sufficient punishment. When the events of tomorrow reach her, she will begin to taste of the bitter cup she has dealt out so largely to others. It were folly to pretend to regret that. I own that I rejoice." Every idea now suffered revulsion, and the stream of feeling flowed again in its old channels. What right had his father to speak thus of the beloved and honored parent he had so cruelly lost? His blood boiled within him, and despite childish fear and reverence, he said, "If my mother will grieve or be injured by my appearing tomorrow, I will not go, I cannot." "You are a fool to speak thus," said his father, "a guileless animal without sense of pride or duty. Come, sir, no more of this. You owe me obedience, and you must pay it on this occasion. You are only bid speak the truth, and that you must speak. I had thought, notwithstanding your youth, higher and more generous motives might be urged a father's honor vindicated, a mother's vileness punished. "My mother is not vile," cried Gerard, and there stopped, for 1,000 things restrain a child's tongue: inexperience, reverence, ignorance of the effect his words may produce, terror at the mightiness of the power with which he has to contend. After a pause, he muttered, "I honor my mother. I will tell the whole world that she deserves honor." "Now, Gerard, on my soul," cried Sir Boyvill, roused to anger, as parents too easily are against their offspring when they show any will of their own, while they expect to move them like puppets. "On my soul, my fine fellow, I could find it in my heart to knock you down. Enough of this. I don't want to terrify you. Be a good boy tomorrow, and I will forgive all." "Forgive me now, father," cried the youth, bursting into tears. "Forgive me and spare me. I cannot obey you. I cannot do anything that will grieve my mother. She loved me so much. I am sure she loves me still, that I cannot do her a harm. I will not go tomorrow." "This is most extraordinary," said Sir Boyvill, controlling as well as he could the rage swelling within him. "And are you such an idiot as not to know that your wretched mother has forfeited all claim to your affection? And am I of so little worth in your eyes, I, your father, who have a right to your obedience from the justice of my cause, not to speak of parental authority? Am I nothing? To receive no duty, expect no service. I was indeed mistaken. I thought you were older than your years, and had that touch of gentlemanly pride about you that would have made you eager to avenge my injuries, to stand by me as a friend and ally, compensating as well as you could for the wrongs done me by your mother. I thought I had a son in whose veins my own blood flowed, who would be ready to prove his true birth by siding with me. Are you stone, or a base-born thing, that you cannot even conceive what thing honor is?" Gerard listened, he wept. The tears poured in torrents from his eyes, but as his father continued, and heaped many an opprobrious epithet on him, a proud and sullen spirit was indeed awakened. He longed to say, "Abuse me, strike me, but I will not yield." Yet he did not speak. He dried his eyes and stood in silence before his parent, his face darkening, and something ferocious gleaming in eyes hitherto so soft and sorrowing. Sir Boyvill saw that he was far from making the impression he desired, but he wished to avoid reiterated refusals to obey, and he summed up at last with vague but violent threats of what would ensue: exile from his home, penury, nay, starvation, the abhorrence of the world, his own malediction. And after having worked himself up into a towering rage and real detestation of the shivering, feeble, yet determined child before him, he left him to consider and to be vanquished. Far other thoughts occupied Gerard. "I had thought," he has told me, "once or twice to throw myself into his arms and pray for mercy, to kneel at his feet and implore him to spare me. One kind word had made the struggle intolerable, but no kind word did he say. And while he stormed, it seemed to me as if my dear mother were singing as she was used, while I gathered flowers and played beside her in the park, and I thought of her, not of him. The words, 'Kick me out of doors,' suggested but the idea, 'I shall be free and I will find my mother.' I feel intensely now, but surely a boy's feelings are far wilder, far more vehement than a man's, for I cannot now, violent as you think me, call up one sensation so whirlwind-like as those that possessed me while my father spoke." Thus has Gerard described his emotions. His father ordered him to quit the room, and he went to brood upon the fate impending over him. On the morrow early, he was bid prepare to attend the House of Lords. His father did not appear. He thought that the boy was terrified, and would make no further resistance. Gerard, indeed, obeyed in silence. He disdained to argue with strangers and hirelings. He had an idea that if he openly rebelled, he might be carried by force, and his proud heart swelled at the idea of compulsion. He got into the carriage, and as he went, Mr. Carter, who was with him, thought it advisable to explain the forms and give some instructions. Gerard listened with composure, nay, asked a question or two concerning the preliminaries. He was told of the oath that would be administered, and how the words he spoke after taking that oath would be implicitly believed, and that he must be careful to say nothing that was not strictly true. The color, not an indignant blush, but a suffusion as of pleasure, mantled over his cheeks as this was explained. They arrived. They were conducted into some outer room to await the call of the peers. What tortures the boy felt as strangers came up, some to speak and others to gaze, all of indignation, resolution, grief, and more than manhood's struggles that tore his bosom during the annoying delays that always protract this sort of scenes, none cared to scan. He was there unresisting, apparently composed. If now his cheek flushed, and now his lips withered into paleness, if now the sense of suffocation rose in his throat, and now tears rushed into his eyes, as the image of his sweet mother passed across his memory, none regarded, none cared. When I have thought of the spasms and throes which his tender and high-wrought soul endured during this interval, I often wonder his heartstrings did not crack, or his reason for ever unsettle. As it is, he has not yet escaped the influence of that hour. It shadows his life with eclipse. It comes whispering agony to him, when otherwise he might forget. Some author has described the effect of misfortune on the virtuous as the crushing of perfumes, so to force them to give forth their fragrance. Gerard is all nobleness, all virtue, all tenderness. Do we owe any part of his excellence to this hour of anguish? If so, I may be consoled, but I can never think of it without pain. He says himself, yes, without these sharp goadings, I had not devoted my whole life to clearing my mother's fame. Is this devotion a good? As yet no apparent benefit has sprung from it. At length he was addressed. Young gentleman, are you ready? And he was led into that stately chamber, fit for solemn and high debate, thronged with the judges of his mother's cause. There was a dimness in his eye, a tumult in his heart that confused him, while on his appearance there was first a murmur, then a general hush. Each regarded him with compassion as they discerned the marks of suffering in his countenance. A few moments passed before he was addressed, and when it was supposed that he had had time to collect himself, the proper officer administered the oath, and then the barrister asked him some slight questions, not to startle, but to lead back his memory by insensible degrees to the necessary facts. The boy looked at him with scorn. He tried to be calm, to elevate his voice. Twice it faltered. The third time he spoke slowly but distinctly. I have sworn to speak the truth, and I am to be believed. My mother is innocent. But this is not the point, young gentleman, interrupted his interrogator. I only asked if you remembered your father's house in Cumberland. The boy replied more loudly, but with broken accents. I have said all I mean to say. You may murder me, but I will say no more. How dare you entice me into injuring my mother? At the word, uncontrollable tears burst forth, pouring in torrents down his burning cheeks. He told me that he well remembers the feeling that rose to his tongue, instigating him to cry shame on all present. But his voice failed. His purpose was too mighty for his young heart. He sobbed and wept. The more he tried to control the impulse, the more hysterical the fit grew. He was taken from the bar, and the peers, moved by his distress, came to a resolve that they would dispense with his attendance and be satisfied by hearing his account of the transaction from those persons to whom he made it at the period when it occurred. I will now mention that the result of this judicial inquiry was a decree of divorce in Sir Boyvill's favor. Gerard, removed from the bar and carried home, recovered his composure, but he was silent, revolving the consequences which he expected would ensue from disobedience. His father had menaced to turn him out of doors, and he did not doubt but that this threat would be put into execution, so that he was somewhat surprised that he was taken home at all. Perhaps they meant to send him to a place of exile of their own choosing, perhaps to make the expulsion public and ignominious. The powers of grown-up people appear so illimitable in a child's eyes, who have no data whereby to discover the probable from the improbable. At length, the fear of confinement became paramount. He revolted from it. His notion was to go and seek his mother, and his mind was quickly made up to forestall their violence and to run away. He was ordered to confine himself to his own room. His food was brought to him. This looked like the confirmation of his fears. His heart swelled high. They think to treat me like a child, but I will show myself independent. Wherever my mother is, she is better than they all. If she is imprisoned, I will free her, or I will remain with her. How glad she will be to see me. How happy shall we be again together. My father may have all the rest of the world to himself. When I am with my mother, in a cavern or a dungeon, I care not where. Night came on, he went to bed, he even slept, and awoke terrified to think that the opportune hour might be overpast. Daylight was dawning faintly in the east. The clocks of London struck 4. He was still in time. Everyone in the house slept. He rose and dressed. He had nearly 10 guineas of his own. This was all his possession. He had counted them the night before he opened the door of his chamber. Daylight was struggling with darkness, and all was very still. He stepped out, he descended the stairs. He got into the hall. Every accustomed object seemed new and strange at that early hour, and he looked with some dismay at the bars and bolts of the house door. He feared making a noise and rousing some servant. Still the thing must be attempted. Slowly and cautiously he pushed back the bolts. He lifted up the chain. It fell from his hands with terrific clatter on the stone pavement. His heart was in his mouth. He did not fear punishment, but he feared ill success. He listened as well as his throbbing pulses permitted. All was still. The key of the door was in the lock. It turned easily at his touch, and in another moment the door was open. The fresh air blew upon his cheeks. The deserted street was before him. He closed the door after him, and with a sort of extra caution locked it on the outside, and then took to his heels, throwing the key down a neighboring street. When out of sight of his home, he walked more slowly, and began to think seriously of the course to pursue. To find his mother. All the world had been trying to find her, and had not succeeded, but he believed that by some means she would hear of his escape and come to him. But whither go in the first instance? His heart replied, to Cumberland, to Dramore. There he had lived with his mother. There had he lost her. He felt assured that in its neighborhood he should again be restored to her. Traveling had given him some idea of distance, and of the modes of getting from one place to another. He felt that it would be a task of too great difficulty to attempt walking across England. He had no carriage. He knew of no ship to take him. Some conveyance he must get, so he applied to a hackney coach. It was standing solitary in the middle of the street, the driver asleep on the steps, the skeleton horses hanging down their heads, with the peculiarly disconsolate look these poor hacked animals have. Gerard, as the son of a wealthy man, was accustomed to consider that he had a right to command those whom he could pay, yet fear of discovery and being sent back to his father filled him with unusual fears. He looked at the horses and the man. He advanced nearer, but he was afraid to take the decisive step, till the driver, awaking, started up and shook himself, stared at the boy, and seeing him well dressed, and he looked, too, older than his years from being tall, he asked, "Do you want me, sir?" "Yes," said Gerard, "I want you to drive me." "Get in, then. Where are you going?" "I am going a long way, to Dramore, that is in Cumberland." The boy hesitated. It struck him that those miserable horses could not carry him far. "Then you want me to take you to the stage?" said the man. "It goes from Piccadilly at 5. We have no time to lose." Gerard got in on they jumbled, and arriving at the coach office, saw some half-dozen stages ready to start. The name of Liverpool on one struck the boy by the familiar name. If he could get to Liverpool, it were easy afterward even to walk to Dramore. So getting out of the hackney coach, he went up to the coachman, who was mounting his box, and asked, "Will you take me to Liverpool?" "Yes, my fine fellow, if you can pay the fare." "How much is it?" drawing out his purse. "Inside or outside?" From the moment he had addressed these men, and they began to talk of money, Gerard, calling to mind the vast disbursements of gold coin he had seen made by his father and the courier on their travels, began to fear that his little stock would ill suffice to carry him so far. And the first suggestion of prudence the little fellow ever experienced made him now answer, "Whichever costs least." "Outside, then." "Oh, I have that. I can pay you." "Jump up then, my lad. Lend me your hand. Here by me. That's right. All's well. You're just in the nick. We are off directly." He cracked his whip, and away they flew, and as they went, Gerard felt free and going to his mother. Such, in these civilized times, are the facilities offered to the execution of our wildest wishes. The consequences, the moral consequences, are still the same, still require the same exertions to overcome them, but we have no longer to fight with physical impediments. If Gerard had begun his expedition from any other town, curiosity had perhaps been excited, but in the vast, busy metropolis, each one takes care of himself, and few scrutinize the motives or means of others. Perched up on the coach-box, Gerard had a few questions to answer. Was he going home? Did he live in Liverpool? But the name of Dramore was a sufficing answer. The coachman had never heard of such a place, but it was a gentleman's seat, and it was Gerard's home, and that was enough. Someday you must ask Gerard to relate to you his adventures during this journey. They will come warmly and vividly from him, while mine, as a mere reflex, must be tame. It is his mind I would describe, and I will not pause to narrate the tantalizing cross-questioning that he underwent from a Scotchman, nor the heart-heavings with which he heard allusions made to the divorce case before the Lords. A newspaper describing his own conduct was in the hands of one of the passengers. He heard his mother lightly alluded to. He would have leaped from the coach, but that was to give up all. He pressed his hands to his ears. He scowled on those around. His heart was on fire. Yet he had one consolation. He was free. He was going to her. He resolved never to mingle with his fellow creatures more. Buried in some rural retreat with his mother, it mattered little what the vulgar and the indifferent said about either. Some qualms did assail him. Should he find his dear mother? Where was she? His childish imagination refused to paint her distant from Dramore. His own removal from that mansion so soon after losing her associated her indelibly with the mountains, the ravines, the brawling streams, and clustering woods of his natal county. She must be there. He would drive away the man of violence who took her from him, and they would be happy together. A day and a night brought him to Liverpool, and the coachman, hearing whither he wished to go, deposited him in the stage for Lancaster on his arrival. He went inside this time and slept all the way. At Lancaster, he was recognized by several persons, and they wondered to see him alone. He was annoyed at their recognition and questionings, and though it was night when he arrived, instantly set off to walk to Dramore. For 2 months from this time, he lived wandering from cottage to cottage, seeking his mother. The journey from Lancaster to Dramore he performed as speedily as he well could. He did not enter the house. That would be delivering himself up as a prisoner. By night he clambered the park railings and entered like a thief the domains where he had spent his childhood. Each path was known to him, and almost every tree. Here he sat with his mother. There they found the first violet of spring. His pilgrimage was achieved, but where was she? His heart beat as he reached the little gate whence they had issued on that fatal night. All the grounds bore marks of neglect and the master's absence, and the lock of this gate was spoiled. A sort of rough bolt had been substituted. Gerard pushed it back. The rank grass had gathered thick on the threshold, but it was the same spot. How well he remembered it. 2 years only had since passed. He was still a child, yet to his own fancy how much taller, how much more of a man he had become. Besides, he now fancied himself master of his own actions. He had escaped from his father, and he who had threatened to turn him out of doors would not seek to possess himself of him again. He belonged to no one. He was cared for by no one, by none but her whom he sought with firm, yet anxious expectation. There he had seen her last. He stepped forward. He followed the course of the lane. He came to where the road crossed it, where the carriage drove up, where she had been torn from him. It was daybreak, a June morning. All was golden and still. A few birds twittered, but the breeze was hushed, and he looked out on the extent of country commanded from the spot where he stood, and saw only nature, the rugged hills, the green cornfields, the flowery meads, and the umbrageous trees in deep repose. How different from the wild, tempestuous night, when she whom he sought was torn away. He could then see only a few yards before him. Now he could mark the devious windings of the road, and afar off, distinguish the hazy line of the ocean. He sat down to reflect. What was he to do? In what nook of the wide expanse was his mother hid? That some portion of the landscape he viewed harbored her was his fixed belief, a belief founded in inexperience and fancy, but not the less deep-rooted. He meditated for some time, and then walked forward. He remembered when he ran panting and screaming along that road. He was a mere child then, and what was he now? A boy of 11, yet he looked back with disdain to the endeavors of 2 years before. He walked along in the same direction that he had at that time pursued, and soon found that he reached the turnpike road to Lancaster. He turned off, and went by the crossroad that leads to the wild and dreary plains that form the coast. The inner range of picturesque hills, on the declivity of which Dramore is situated, is not more than 5 miles from the sea, but the shore itself is singularly blank and uninteresting, varied only by sandhills thrown up to the height of 30 or 40 feet, intersected by rivers, which at low water are fordable even on foot, but which, when the tide is up, are dangerous to those who do not know the right track, from the holes and ruts which render the bed of the river uneven. In winter, indeed, at the period of spring tides, or in stormy weather, with a west wind which drives the ocean towards the shore, the passage is often exceedingly dangerous, and except under the direction of an experienced guide, fatal accidents occur. Gerard reached the borders of the ocean near one of these streams. Behind him rose his native mountains, range above range, divided by tremendous gulfs, varied by the shadows of the clouds and the gleams of sunlight. Close to him was the waste seashore. The ebbing tide gave a dreary, sluggish appearance to the ocean, and the river, a shallow, rapid stream, emptied its slender pittance of mountain water noiselessly into the lazy deep. It was a scene of singular desolation. On the other side of the river, not far from the mouth, was a rude hut, unroofed, and fallen to decay, erected perhaps as the abode of a guide. Near it grew a stunted tree, withered, moss-covered, spectre-like. The sandhills lay scattered around, the seagulls screamed above and skimmed over the waste. Gerard sat down and wept, motherless, escaped from his angry father. Even to his young imagination, his fate seemed as drear and gloomy as the scene around. Chapter 20. I do not know why I have dwelt on these circumstances so long. Let me hasten to finish. For 2 months Gerard wandered in the neighborhood of Dramore. If he saw a lone cottage, embowered in trees, hidden in some green recess of the hills, sequestered and peaceful, he thought, perhaps my mother is there. And he clambered towards it, finding it at last, probably, a mere shepherd's hut, poverty-stricken and tenanted by a noisy family. His money was exhausted. He made a journey to Lancaster to sell his watch, and then returned to Cumberland. His clothes, his shoes were worn out. Often he slept in the open air. Used milk, cheese, and black bread were his fare. His hope was to find his mother, his fear to fall again into his father's hands. But as the first sentiment failed, his friendless condition grew more sad. He began to feel that he was indeed a feeble, helpless boy, abandoned by all. He thought nothing was left for him but to lie down and die. Meanwhile he was noticed, and at last recognized, by some of the tenants, and information reached his father of where he was. Unfortunately, the circumstance of his disappearance became public. It was put into the newspapers as a mysterious occurrence, and the proud Sir Boyville found himself not only pitied on account of his wife's conduct, but suspected of cruelty towards his only child. At first he was himself frightened and miserable, but when he heard where Gerard was, and that he could be recovered at any time, these softer feelings were replaced by fury. He sent the tutor to possess himself of his son's person. He was seized with the help of a constable, treated more like a criminal than an unfortunate, erring child, carried back to Buckinghamshire, shut up in a barricaded room, debarred from air and exercise, lectured, menaced, treated with indignity. The boy, hitherto accustomed to more than usual indulgence and freedom, was at first astonished and then wildly indignant at the treatment he suffered. He was told that he should not be set free till he submitted. He believed that to mean until he could give testimony against his mother. He resolved rather to die. Several times he endeavored to escape, and was brought back and treated with fresh barbarity, his hands bound, and stripes inflicted by menials, till driven to despair, he at one time determined to starve himself, and at another tried to bribe a servant to bring him poison. The trusting piety inculcated by his gentle mother was destroyed by the ill-judged cruelty of his father and his doltish substitute. It is painful to dwell on such circumstances, to think of a sensitive, helpless child treated with the brutality exercised towards a galley slave. Under this restraint, Gerard grew such as you saw him at Baden, sullen, ferocious, plunged in melancholy, delivered up to despair. It was some time before he discovered that the submission demanded of him was not to run away again. On learning this, he wrote to his father. He spoke with horror of the personal indignities he had endured, of his imprisonment, of the conduct of Mr. Carter. He did not mean it as such, but his letter grew into an affecting, irresistible appeal that even moved Sir Boyville. His stupid pride prevented him from showing the regret he felt. He still used the language of reproof and conditional pardon, but the tutor was dismissed, and Gerard restored to liberty. Had his father been generous, or just enough to show his regret, he might probably have obliterated the effects of his harshness. As it was, Gerard gave no thanks for a boon which saved his life, but restored him to none of its social blessings. He was still friendless, still orphaned in his affections, still the memory of intolerable tyranny, the recurrence of which was threatened if he made an ill use of the freedom accorded him, clung like the shirt of Nessus, and his noble, ardent nature was lacerated by the intolerable recollection of slavish terrors.